hearing me? That's coming through? Yes. I want to ask you as we start this morning, have you ever faced a giant in your life? Some problem, some situation, perhaps it's a person that's just so intimidating, so big that you feel like a total underdog. As I thought about this, I think maybe because of some circumstances early in my life, I've always related to the underdog. And, I have to say, I cheer for the BC Lions on a regular basis, but when the Bombers come to town, the Blue Bombers from Winnipeg, where I grew up, I have to say I'm cheering for them, and they are the underdog. The last time the Bombers beat the Lions, for the record, was August 2011. It was 30-17, if anybody was interested. So it's been a long time. But I've always related as well, in a special way, to this story in 1 Samuel 17, to David and Goliath, this epic confrontation and battle. And I've entitled my message today, "Who do you think you are?" And I've done that because this question is asked back and forth quite a bit in this series of passages or scripture. Young David was asked this question by his older brother, Eliab. He was asked this in essence by Saul, and of course by Goliath himself. Who do you think you are? And then he in turn asks Goliath, who do you think you are that you would defy the armies of the living God? So there's a lot of this confrontation. You could call it smack talk going back and forth. I also wanted to present the second idea that question, who do you think you are, is largely answered or determined by a second question, who is your God? Before I begin, I want to briefly look at a map of the area we're going to be talking about today. And you can see Jerusalem up in the top right-hand corner here. Bethlehem is below that, and that's the area where David would have been tending his father's sheep. And of course, he was sent to the valley Elah, where this confrontation was taking place between the Philistines towards the coast and the Israelite army, and across this valley of Elah. Let's just pray for a second as I begin. Lord, I do pray that as we open up these ancient words, Lord, that you would transport us back to that place of this epic battle. And Lord, you would also bring us to the place of the battles that are going on in our life right now, so that we would have tools and your leading to deal with those situations. Lord, bless this, your word. Amen. So, as we look at this scripture, I'm going to read through this passage. Now, it's quite a long passage in terms of things, so you're going to have to hang in there with me. But I want you to hear it. I want you to be there with these characters in this situation. I want you to be starting to think about that question. Who do you think you are? As this question asked of each of or many of the people in the passage. And also, who is your God? And I pray that'll be the case for us. We'll be asking that question of ourselves as well. So now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Sukkah and Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Dammim between Sukkah and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with a valley between them. So if you see in this picture, there's this big flat valley in between, and then you have hill country on either side. And they would have camped up on those hills. And so if you're one army, you'd have to come all the way down your hill, and then to try and attack the guys in their camp, you'd have to start back up the other side. So they weren't too apt to want to do that and be looking up at the enemy. So they were kind of at a bit of a stalemate here. All right, the next slide. So a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He's probably close to 9 feet tall. If you think about it, in the NBA, he would have been able to dunk it without even leaving the ground. It's 10 feet, the rim, by the way. So he had a bronze helmet on his head, and he wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels, maybe 150 to 200 pounds, just his armor. On his legs, he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and the point weighed 600 shekels. That would be about 25 pounds. You wouldn't want that piercing your flesh. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Interesting, had a shield bearer. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me." So what he was suggesting is kind of a representative battle, and apparently this took place many times. It saved a lot of bloodshed and everybody, all these strewn bodies all over the field. You just send out your best guy and you have a battle. And what he's saying, if he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. Then the Philistine said, that this day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other. On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time he was very old. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep in Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward every morning and every evening and took his stand. And isn't that like the giants in our own life? They keep coming back. We take them to bed at night. They wake us up sometimes early in the morning. They move into our master bedroom. They start raiding our refrigerator. They leave their smelly socks all over our house. We smell them. We can't get away from them. So for 40 days and 40 nights, he kept coming out. Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take along these cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are doing, and come back with assurances from them. There was Saul and all the men in Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. Early in the morning, David left his flocks with a shepherd, loaded up, and set out. And as Jesse had directed, he reached the camp as the army was going out to battle in its battle positions, shouting their war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their battle lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and asked his brothers how they were. And as he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from the lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw them, they all fled in great fear, or saw him, they fled in great fear. Now the Israelites have been saying, do you see this man who keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter's hand in marriage and will exempt his family from the taxes in Israel. David asked the man standing near him, what will he do for the man who kills this Philistine and removes the disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the man, he burned with anger, and he asked, "Why have you come down here? And whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and wicked your heart is, and you came down just to watch the battle." "Well, now what have I done?" says David. "Can't I even speak?" He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter. And he answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul. And so Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go and fight against this Philistine, or you're not able to go against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion and a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it. I struck it. I rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by the hair. I struck it and I killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hands of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put on a coat of armor and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on the sword and the tunic, and he tried walking around because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I am not used to them." So he took them off. And then he took his staff in his hand. He picked up 5 smooth stones, put in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept moving closer to David. He looked David over, and he saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come out to me with sticks?" Notice he says sticks. And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty and the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." He speaks well for a young man. This day the Lord will deliver me into your hand, or you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves. The battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David quickly ran towards the battle line to meet him. Reaching in his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine in the forehead. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. And David ran and stood over him and took hold of the Philistine's sword and pulled it from its sheath. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw their hero was dead, they turned and they ran. The men of Israel and Judah surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Sheraim road to Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from chasing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. David took the Philistines' head and he brought it to Jerusalem. He put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. As Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of his army, "Abner, whose son is that young man?" Abner replied, "As surely as you live, your majesty, I don't know." The king said, "Find out whose son this young man is." As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. Whose son are you, young man? Saul asked him. David said, I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem. May God bless this, the reading of his word. So, as we look at the characters in this passage, I want you to stop and start to consider how they, and in turn, each of us would answer these questions. Who do you think you are? Or maybe as Denzel Washington would put it in Remember the Titans? Who's your daddy? Who's your God? Who's backing you up? Who do you answer to? Dostoevsky once famously said that if we don't answer to God above, then we are all gods. But those gods are governed by frail human hopes and fears. And it's interesting to think about that and contrast it with what we hear in Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, to prosper you, not to harm you, for a hope and for a future. I think when we answer that question, why did David step up? Why did he speak up and say, I can do it? I think he knew the plans that God had for him. He knew the hope of having God with him. And you think about it, contrast this when you think about it, like these Israelites, they've been hearing this for 40 days and 40 nights. Every time Goliath's coming and calling them down, cursing them, how do they respond? They just shrunk back each time. But David hears it once. This is his first time to the front lines. And right away, his response is different. He proclaims, who is this Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? He was putting words to the outrage he was feeling. I think they were all feeling that, but he put words to it, and he also started to put things in perspective. Yes, there's that giant out there, but who's my God? He's up there. He makes that giant start to shrink very quickly. If we look on in verses 25 and 26, David is also kind of curious, notice, about this reward. Kind of asks about it a few times. And I love God's word that it gives us an unvarnished version of things. It doesn't just super spiritualize the characters in the passage. We also see that David has an ambitious side. He says, well, so what is it that you get if you kill the big guy? And if I was in his shoes, this is a pretty good offer. Great riches, no taxes for life for you and your family, and the king's daughter in marriage. Well, I'm already married to a daughter of the king, so I'm okay there, but the rest of it sounds very good. But so David is checking out what the rewards are. He's thinking about maybe what skills he has. Has he practiced long and hard enough in the desert or when he's watching over those sheep? Has he got the right skills for this particular battle? As I was preparing this message, one of the thoughts I had, or questions I had, is, do the major struggles in our life make us who we are, or do they reveal who we are already? And I suspect that the younger age at which those battles we're confronted with in our life, they probably do determine more of our eventual character. But it's as much as who we look for during those struggles and battles for counsel, for support. Who do we go to? What wisdom do we turn to? When you step up to do battle with a giant, expect that there's going to be detractors and doubters. There's going to be those who say, oh, no, you can't do it. And this was very much the case for David. First of all, Eliab, his older brother, sees him talking and asking questions at the front line. Right away, he says, you're conceited. You have a wicked heart. He jumps on him. And let's not forget, there's a little history. In the previous chapter, chapter 16 in 1 Samuel, we learn that the prophet Samuel was sent to the house of Jesse to anoint a future king. And he calls the family together, and he first of all sees Eliab, the oldest brother. He's the obvious choice, big, handsome guy, and he thinks must be the guy. God says no. He goes through the next 6 sons. No, 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 no. And they go, wow, is there anybody else? They go and they look for David. He's in the back 40 looking after the livestock. And they bring him there. And all the brothers apparently all were standing waiting. You can imagine. There's a bit of resentfulness growing maybe in Eliab's heart at the time. And sure enough, he is the one, and he's anointed. And God's word says that the Spirit of God fell mightily upon David at that time. It also references Saul at the time and said, a spirit of wickedness entered Saul at that time. We'll understand that later. So that's the first doubter he has to confront. And it's interesting that in life, we maybe have all done this at times, that when maybe there is some wicked motive in us that we project it on another, we choose to see it in somebody else rather than own up to those selfish motives in our own heart. For man looks on the outside, but God looks at the heart. Is David discouraged by his big brother, who should be really his top encourager? No. He just slips away to talk to some other people. He's willing to choose his battles that day, and he's already starting to grow up quickly in wisdom. The doubters continue, though. He's taken to Saul because of the words he said, and somebody brings him forward, and Saul basically says, you're just a boy. Since he's been a youth, he's been trained as a warrior. You're looking at the heavyweight champion of the world here that you're going to be taking on. Who do you think you are, David? And I love David's response. It's both respectful, it's enthusiastic, and there's a lot of wisdom in it. He says, I've been taking on large enemies for quite some time here. God delivered me from the paw of the bear, the paw of the lion, and he'll deliver me from this Philistine. He will deliver me from his hand, and I will kill him and defeat him. He makes a quite impassioned plea. And Saul has ears to hear it. And I mean Saul. Saul is the king of the army of Israel. When he was initially crowned king, it was said he was at least a head higher than any other Israelite. He was a big man, powerful man. And so he was really, in many ways, the natural man to go from Israel's side and go and fight Goliath. And if he had believed God was with him and his faith was in God, maybe he would have. But I believe that his God at that time was becoming increasingly the God of power, retaining power at all costs. The fear of losing it was too great, so he couldn't take that step. And he really didn't have, I would say, much of a choice at that point. It had been 40 days after all, but to say, go and the Lord be with you. Chuck Swindoll reminds us that these empty sort of spiritual cliches like go and the Lord be with you can sometimes cover up what are very empty lives. But Saul has an afterthought, trying to build some advantage in. He says, well, put on my armor, all this expensive armor I have, a big, huge helmet, a massive tunic, heavy. I was thinking, this is a good example. This is Terrell Brown. He's a 390-pound lineman. And this water boy is trying to reach up. He's not a bad-sized guy himself there, but he's trying to reach up and give him water. It would be like him taking off his equipment and putting it on the water boy and him going out on the field. I think he'd be weighed down quite a lot and not be very effective. And that's what David concluded quickly. He walked around in the equipment. He said, I can't wear these. I can't use this sword. It's too heavy. But David had a plan of attack. I believe he practiced in the wilderness when he was looking after that sheep. probably for many, many hours with his sling. Because again, you move the sheep to by the water, you got lots of time on your hand. You move them over to another pasture, you got lots of time on your hand. Basically a kind of a security guard, and if nothing happens, you can do what you want. So I think he practiced probably for hours and hours. And I thought about this, when I was young, I had lots of time on my hands too. And I used to go behind Glenwood Motors in Winnipeg. And it was a big brick structure. My dad was not in great health, so he couldn't really throw the ball with me. And so I had a lacrosse ball, really bouncy, a lacrosse ball. And I'd throw it against that brick wall, and I'd catch it with my baseball glove. And I would do it for endless times. And I got where not too many balls got past me. And I worked hard because I wanted to make the baseball team. And I tried out, and I made a position in the infield. Not shortstop, but second base was pretty good. But it was those hours and hours of practice that got me there. And it was also an attitude of being the underdog, that I had to work harder. And I think trusting in God and his promises doesn't mean that we shouldn't develop our skills, that we shouldn't practice. I mean, after all, really, I've been practicing at medicine for 30 years. It's a long time. When I say that, I also would say that every week I pray for wisdom, and thankfully many people pray for wisdom as a physician for me. And as I go into an office, if I know it's going to be a challenging medical problem or situation, I'm often praying as I put my hand on that doorknob. Is God more likely to choose underdogs? As we look at 1 Corinthians 1:26 through 31, I could say maybe he does. Does he just choose underdogs? No, but he often does. Think about Gideon. Think about Joseph. Think about, initially in his infancy, baby Jesus. Who would have thought, that this baby was going to overcome all of sin, overcome Satan, overcome King Herod, ultimately. God chooses underdogs. And he says he chose the weak things to shame the strong, the lowly, the despised. And he says, why? So let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. He gives us perspective. So when David headed out to face Goliath, he had a little more going for him as the underdog than you'd first think. And I read earlier this year a book by Malcolm Gladwell called David and Goliath. It's subtitled Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Beating Giants. And it started making me think about this, and as I got talking to Pastor Harry, he said, you should do a message on that, and here I am. Careful what you say to Pastor Harry. So David had discarded the heavy armor. He was quick on his feet. He ran to the battle lines, and here's the big lumbering, Goliath with 100, 200 pounds of armor on him. He was really heavy infantry. And if you look at ancient battles, oftentimes the slingers were used in these ancient battles, and the slingers basically defeated heavy infantry most of the time. Slingers were very decisive in many ways. Their accuracy was apparently very good at even a distance of 100 yards or more. And if you look at what they did, my wife said, don't do this, your pants may fall down, but they whip it around like this. And at 6 revolutions per second. And when they released that stone, it was released equivalent to a 45 millimeter handgun, but probably more accurate for the ones that were practiced at it. So he knew what he was doing. Now, Goliath had a shield bearer. He moved slowly, and he likely had poor eyesight. Why do I say that? He keeps saying, come to me, come closer to me. But David had no intention of getting within his wheelhouse. He wasn't going there. Medical historians point out that and speculate that Goliath likely had a condition, the most common cause of giantism, which is acromegaly. And some of you may remember Andre the Giant from maybe the Princess Bride movie, right? He starred in that. And if some of you go way back, All-Star Wrestling with Andre the Giant. Anybody? Yes? Probably some of you, yeah. So he had acromegaly, which is the most common cause of giantism. And they have a tumor, a pituitary tumor in the middle of their brain. So their vision can be affected because the nerves go right past that pituitary tumor. They start to encroach on it, and it often makes them see double. So when he says, it's curious, David, that Goliath says, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" Well, he had his one staff with him, not sticks. Maybe he was seeing double. So what's my point? I think the source of the Goliath's great strength and size may have also been his greatest weakness. But and when you confront giants, it's not till you start getting in there in the battle, you have the faith to move forward and start trying to wrestle with the situation, that you actually find out sometimes that giant actually has weaknesses. It took his faith in God to be able to do that. Let me sum up. Wisdom in doing battle as an underdog, it takes the ability to discard that which weighs you down, to understand your strengths and your weaknesses. If possible, do battle on your terms and not on the giant's terms. Try and get home field advantage. But most of all, trust that God has put you in that situation to bring himself glory. So when the giants come knocking in your life, how will you respond? Will you be like the posers in this story, to use a John Eldridge term from Wild at Heart? Posers like Eliab, who just projects his own wicked feelings on his brother. He won't step forward. Will you be like Saul, who I think his God was power at that point, and maintaining that power at all costs? And so he couldn't move forward. And what about the whole Israelite army? Here it says they had these war cries. They moved up to the battle lines, but every time Goliath came out, they shrunk back. I think we're often, unfortunately, like those posers. I know I have been. Could we be like David, stepping up when God presented him an opportunity that he obviously had been preparing him for in an indirect way for quite some time? Walking through the fear, the intimidation, the doubters, sometimes that doubt even coming from your own family, coming only even from the church, perhaps at times around you. Are we going after God's purposes? Sometimes we end up just quarreling amongst ourselves. Who are you when you're facing giants? It's a lot about where your heart is turned, where your trust lies. So when the bad news comes, when those hurtful words are spoken, when life falls and spills all over the floor, pick up those rocks, those 5 stones of faith. Step forward and remember the solid ground, the solid rock on which you stand. You say to yourself, I will not believe lies. I am a child of the one true King. The battle is the Lord's.